Story 1. Nature's Call. I've been a trucker most of my life, been many places, seen many things, and experienced many more. Everything I can ever recount about my time on the road pales in comparison to this one encounter I had a few years ago in the middle of nowhere. It was my own fault, really. I'd been downing coffee like water in the desert, and it was about time to pay the piper. My bladder was sending out SOS signals, and I knew there wasn't a chance in hell I'd make it to the next truck stop. I was in a real fix, caught between a rock and a hard place. Deciding that it was now or never, I saw an off-ramp in the distance and made a beeline for it, pulling off and onto the shoulder. As my truck hissed to a stop, I saw a man standing on the bridge ahead, illuminated by the moonlight. He was just standing there, still as could be, looking in the other direction. At first, I wasn't overly concerned about the man. He seemed to pay me no attention, and he was far enough away that I felt like he really wasn't a threat, even though it was late at night out in the middle of nowhere. I'll be honest too that at the time, the most important thing on my mind was making my way out of the truck to answer nature's call. So, I climbed down from my cab, trying to act like I hadn't seen him, skirted around the front of the truck, and made my way over to the passenger side to handle my business. The relief was much needed. As I finished up, I could hear something coming from the distance. For a minute, I was like a deer in the woods, completely motionless so that I could get a better gauge on the sound that I was hearing. It was footsteps, but not just footsteps. It was the sound of someone running. As I made my way back around the front of the truck, the man who had moments ago paid me no attention was running dead at me and my truck. He wasn't just running, though. He was in an all-out sprint. I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't want to stick around to find out. I hustled back into the truck, the alarm bells in my head blasting as loud as they could go. I locked the doors the moment I was inside, and then, as if he was possessed by a demon or something, the man was suddenly on the step of my rig, pounding on the window with a crazed look plastered across his face, shouting, "Open up! I need a ride!" My blood ran cold. Everything happened so fast that I didn't even have time to process what was going on. Summoning up what little bit of wits I still had about me, I shouted out at him to get the hell off my truck. I wasn't about to play hero to some midnight lunatic. He didn't move, just kept hammering on the window, his eyes desperate. Then he was off, running around to the passenger side before I could even think. He was up on the step again, slamming his fists against the window, screaming about needing that ride. Panic overcame every inch of me. I started the rig, the engine roaring to life as I hit the gas, hoping he'd take the hint and bail. He did, jumping off just as the truck started to pick up speed. As the rig made its way down the road, I checked the mirrors but couldn't see a thing. It was too dark, and I had no idea where he went. As I drove on, a terrible thought raced through my mind. What if he never got off the truck? What if he latched on somewhere where I couldn't see him? Would he come after me after I finally stopped? I hopped on the dial and barked out my situation, pleading for the cops as I kept the rig rolling, my eyes flicking between the road and the mirrors. When the cops showed up, their lights were a swirl of red and blue that cut through the night. Never in my life would I have ever thought that I'd be relieved to see cop lights flashing in my mirrors. I pulled over, and together we scoured the truck, checking every possible hidey hole and shadow where the man might have slipped into. But there was nothing, no trace of him. The cops gave me that look, the kind that said they thought I was just seeing things, but I knew what I'd seen. I hit the road again as soon as they left, but I wasn't the same. I couldn't forget the look of that man's crazed face just outside my window, inches from mine, glaring at me in a possessed rage. I never found out who that person was, or why he came at me the way that he did. It was a terrifying experience, one that I'll never forget, and one that took many years to put behind me. Story 2. You didn't stop. I've seen a lot of things on these long-haul nights. You spend enough time on the road, you start to think you've seen it all. But there's always something waiting to prove you wrong. Always one more story that you'll be turning over in your mind until the day you hang up your keys for good. One of my creepiest truck driving experiences happened years ago, when I was driving a route so familiar I could trace it in my sleep. I was the only soul for miles. It was just me, my rig, and the road. I was just driving down the road as I had done so many times when a voice cut through the radio. It was a man's voice. It was ragged and strained. I'll never forget the words that came, though. "Help. Mile marker 89. Anybody?" In an instant, my drive went from the mundane to incredibly creepy. Mile marker 89 was about 2 miles up ahead from where I was at the time. I've never been one to shy away from helping, but this felt off. I thought about the stories you hear, the ones that start off like this and don't end with everyone coming home. As I saw the marker approaching, I could see a car pulled off to the side of the road, right beside it. There was something ominous about it. A car pulled over in the dark, no hazard lights, no movement. With a total disregard for what my instincts were telling me, I began to slow down a little bit. Every story of every bad ending on the road played in my head. My truck crept forward. I told myself that if I saw a face, if someone waved me down, I'd stop. But there was nothing. Just an empty car and a voice on the radio that might as well have been a ghost. Somewhat relieved that I didn't have to grapple with the decision of whether or not to pull over, I accelerated and continued on my way. It was an eerie few minutes, that's for sure, but it was behind me. Or so I thought. About a mile down the road, the same voice came back through the radio. It said only 3 words. "You didn't stop." I could feel a chill run down my spine. Who was this person, and were they talking to me? My sense of dread escalated more when I could see headlights appear in my rear mirrors in the distance. They were closing in fast, too fast, like they were on a mission. I've never been one to spook easy, but I felt more and more uneasy as I watched those headlights grow larger. I pushed my rig, foolishly thinking somewhere in the back of my mind that I could actually outrun the car, or any car for that matter. Soon enough, they were right on my tail, so close that it felt like they were trying to push me off the road. I kept checking the mirrors, trying to make out a driver, a plate, anything. But all I could see was the blinding glare of headlights in the dark. A mile, stretched into 2 miles, then 3, then 4. I was panicked, confused, and terrified all at once. I couldn't figure out who this was or why they were on my tail. My mind was a blur with the gears in my head going full throttle trying to figure out what to do. Should I call the authorities? Speed up? Pull over? I didn't know. Finally, after about 5 miles, they suddenly started to fall back just a little bit. Then a little bit more, then a little bit more. In my windshield was a decent hill. As I crested over the top, I looked back in my mirrors again. The road behind me was empty. No sign of the car, no sign of anyone. It was like they'd vanished into thin air. I couldn't tell you if what happened was some kind of sick game or something else. Something that didn't have a rational explanation. I've driven a lot of miles since then, and I've passed mile marker 89 in the daylight. Nothing there to even hint at that night's strangeness. At night, I drive past it like it's not even there. I'll never figure out what in the hell happened that night. Who was the voice coming through the radio? Was it just pure coincidence that there was a car pulled over there at that mile marker? Most importantly, who in the hell was tailing me with their bright lights on full blast? Was it the same car? Your guess is as good as mine. I can't shake the feeling that sometimes, late at night, there's more out on the road than just us truckers. Most nights when I find myself alone on a stretch of road, I turn the radio down low and I watch the mile markers pass one by one, praying I never hear that voice again. Story 3. I've Got a Long Walk. This creepy story happened to me back in the fall of 2006. I'd picked up a job hauling a load of construction supplies. Bundles of drywall, shingles, you name it. They were all boxed up and stacked to the nines on the back of my rig, each one needing a strap and those protective covers to keep them from getting torn by the wind. It was the dead of night, and I'd been driving for a little bit when I spotted trouble in my side mirror. The tarp covering the load was flapping like a flag in a storm. I was annoyed. I knew a loose tarp could spell a world of trouble on the road, so I pulled the rig over on a wide shoulder and came to a stop. When I got out and took a look, I saw that the tarp job was nothing to be proud of. It was a mess, and if it had been done right in the first place, my creepy encounter wouldn't have happened. As I started working on the tarp, I noticed a man. He was off a ways, but it was the dead of night and there was nobody else around. I kept my cool, one eye on the tarp and one on him. I was out in the middle of nowhere. It was no place for a pedestrian, and it sure as hell wasn't a place I expected company. As he got closer, I discreetly grabbed my winch bar, an 8-pound piece of metal that was good to have around the truck for various jobs, and in this case, good enough for protection too. The man was an odd guy, that's for sure. His hair was a mess. He looked like he'd tried to give himself a mullet and failed halfway through. His clothes were a sight, all stained and worn, and his sneakers had seen better days, especially the one missing its laces, tongue hanging out like it was gasping for air. As I worked away, he finally made his way up to me and stopped, just standing there till I gave him a nod. "I've got a long walk," he said, voice as flat as the road. I shrugged, told him there wasn't much I could do about that. This was a solo gig, insurance and regulations made sure of that. He nodded, as if he understood, and kept on walking, but then, just as he got level with my cab, he stopped and turned back. "I've got a long walk," he repeated, like he'd forgotten he'd already told me. That set off alarm bells in my head, but I kept it friendly, apologized, and told him again I couldn't help. I watched him go, waiting for him to get a good distance away before I turned back to finish the tarp job. I remember being somewhat relieved that the guy, I believed, had finally gotten the message. But when I glanced back over, he'd turned around and was heading back towards me, hand raised to his ear as if he was on the phone. That didn't sit right with me. Something about it screamed off. Rushing to finish, I scrambled back into the cab, locking the doors as I settled in. The winch bar lay beside me. Having it gave me little comfort, but it was better than having nothing. Through the windshield, I stared at the guy. My eyes were locked onto him, trying to figure out what in the hell he was doing. As he got closer, I could see that he was in a heated conversation. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but whatever it was, he was very animated about it. As he got closer and closer, I began to realize something. He wasn't talking on a phone. He had his hand up pretending to talk on a phone. I remember my heart pounded against my ribs as I fired up the engine. I didn't know what this guy was up to, but there was obviously something not connecting right between his ears, and I just wanted to get the hell out of there. I pulled out onto the road, not taking my eyes off of him for a split second. As the rig began to move, he started hurrying towards me. He started waving his hands and cursing and screaming at me. For a split second, I remember thinking to myself that if I don't get up enough speed, this guy is going to jump up on my truck. Luckily for me, I did get enough speed and went barreling by the guy, leaving him in my rear mirrors. I've spent a lot of time on the road, seen things that'd make most folks' skin crawl, but nothing got to me like that eerie encounter with that man. What in the hell was he doing out there in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night? Why was he pretending to talk on a phone? There's a lot of weird crap that happens out in the middle of nowhere in the dead of the night. I don't know whatever happened to the guy, but I hope to God that nobody was foolish enough to pick him up.